this is probably also one of the reasons why the European Central Bank has announced like a two-tier interest rate system. And what they're looking to do is like to alleviate the negative interest rate burden on the liquidity of the banks, let's say the excess deposits, and say, okay, you don't have to pay an interest on that. So we're not going to make that rate negative, but we're just going to keep the other rate negative. So it's like a two-tier system that they're looking to do right now. It's really interesting. It's unprecedented. Everything that's going on is unprecedented. It's totally crazy, in my opinion. So we'll see what this leads to, but in my opinion, it can only lead to an even harder crash of the economy in the near future.
SDBullion.com is a high-volume physical gold, silver, and precious metal dealer. We are committed to being your trusted source for low-cost, highest quality investment-grade bullion products. Visit SDBullion.com for more information.
Welcome to the Silver Doctors exclusive. Today I'm excited to have first-time guest, Mr. Marco Janssen. He's a monetary enthusiast as well as a commentator, and today he's joining us to share his thoughts on the economy as well as a variety of other subject matter. So Marco Janssen, welcome to Silver Doctors.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be here.
Well, I appreciate you taking time to sit down with us. I know it's a time difference over there. You're currently in the Netherlands, so appreciate you for joining us. And so I want to dive off. For those that may not know Marco Janssen, can you give us a little bit of your background and how you've arrived at this current point in your career? And then we'll get into some of the nitty gritty as far as the details, because I'm curious to find out what's happening over the EU area. So for those that may not know you, can you give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, sure can, Mike. I've been an entrepreneur for about 20 years now, and I have my own business as a consultant, a business consultant and project manager for my customers throughout the Netherlands mostly. And over the course of the past 10 years since the crisis, which hit my company, I decided to dive into the monetary system and the financial system. I do have a financial background, so I have some baggage there. And I've been doing a lot of research. I keep up with the news, Bloomberg, Zero Hedge, sources like that. And I read papers, I read all kinds of commentary from other people, and I read bank statements, etc. So I really go down into the nitty gritty of the system, basically. And I try to keep up on the things that are happening. And ever since 2013, now going back 6 years, I've been doing the Janssen report. It's a vlog. It's like you said, a monetary comment, basically commenting on what's going on and the insanity that we're currently seeing. And for those 6 years, I've been warning about what's called ZIRP and NIRP, like zero interest rate policy and negative interest rate policy. And we see that back in full effect right now.
All right. Well, I appreciate you for sharing that. And so let's dive right in. And so we're approaching the end of 2019. And so I'll typically start off with, what are some things that you yourself are keeping an eye on? Anything in particular worth covering, as well as give us some of your insights as what's happening in your current neck of the woods as well.
Yeah, as you and your listeners, your audience may have noticed that the central banks around the world have been using bazookas to stimulate the economy, if you will. What has always concerned me is that this is actually a big farce. It's a big lie, like Steve Keen, for instance, has been saying, but many other economists that are not really in the mainstream have been commenting on this as being, completely false, a false narrative, where maybe if you want to dive into that as to why it is false, we could do that. But what's really concerning me right now is the new bazooka that the ECB wants to take out, and they want to start, or they're starting purchase of 20 billion euros per month of asset-backed securities. So they're starting the QE, the quantitative easing, again, because the previous one didn't really work as well as it should have. And of course, it has its reasons, because it can't work. It can never work. So the concern is, this is destroying the economy, basically. It's destroying the markets. It's really leading to inflation in markets, not so much inflation in the real economy, which is consumer price index, which is completely different from the monetary inflation that we've been seeing. But it's leading to inflation in markets. Everything's out of whack, basically.
All right. Now, it looks like, it hasn't even been a full year of them tightening or stopping their asset purchasing program. But it looks like for some reason, as you mentioned, it can't work. It never could work. And so give me some of the insights as to why it can't work, because they are trained PhD economists. Clearly, they have to know that, what's really going on.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've been wondering about. Do they know or don't they? If they don't know, that's serious. But on the other hand, if they do know, then that may even be more serious, because then they're willingly scamming all of us. As to why I don't think it can work, and what they're saying is, okay, we want to reach a target of 2% inflation in the real economy. They're talking about inflation being the consumer price index. Now, for this to happen, you need to have an increase in demand for the products and services that comprise that basket of goods that is measured as being the consumer price index. So that has to go up by 2%. So there needs to be more demand. Now, how do they want to do that? If they print money, they hand it over to the banks, which is what they do. Basically, they buy, let's say, mortgage-backed securities in the States or asset-backed securities in the Eurozone. And they're saying, okay, what we want to do is we want to stimulate the banking system to loan more money into the real economy by having very low interest rates. So it will be easier for them to loan out this money. And what will have to happen in the real economy is that those actors in the real economy, like you and I, like consumers, but also companies, need to take on more debt to purchase goods and those services, right? So these are several steps that need to happen. But considering the debt burden already in the economy, which is huge, which moved from, let's say, 157 trillion around 2008 to 250 trillion now, it's insane. It can't really work, because if you're putting a much higher debt burden on people, how are they ever going to pay that back? So it could be a short-term stimulus if people are really going to behave like that in the real economy, but we're not really seeing that anyway. And of course, it's true that people cannot handle more debt, especially when the economy, would flourish. Let's say it would within a year or 2 years in the short term, and this policy would work. And then the interest rates would rise again, and then people will be unable to repay or even pay the debt. They wouldn't even be able to service the debt, let alone repay the principal. So this will totally crash the economy from that point on. So in that sense, maybe you can see little blimps in the short term of a little bit of inflation, but in my opinion, this could never work.
Right. Now, as far as the assets they're looking to purchase again, so I'm assuming it's more so now it's on the private side where they're looking to actually purchase corporate debt. And so what are some things they can also look to buy beyond what they're currently buying or were buying before? How far can they go as far as looking to actually acquire things to add to their portfolio when they're printing this funny money out of nowhere? How far can they go with that?
Pretty far, because as they've done so far, I guess they've purchased more than $1 trillion already in the Eurozone in their first QE round since 2013-14. And what they do, well, they look at bundles of different forms of, let's say, assets, but this could be credit card debt, this could be bonds, and maybe corporate bonds or government bonds, what have you. So it could be anything. It's just like these asset-backed securities are repackaged loans, little pieces here and there that they kind of repackage into what they call asset-backed securities, and then they can purchase them. It's almost as if it's just let's say a fraud that they're setting up to be able to alleviate the debt burden of the banks, or let's say the bad debt that is holding back banks, that is making them perform worse than they could. And this is a way for them to help those, the banking system, which is largely comprised of profit companies or for-profit companies with, entrepreneurial risks. They are really helping them to get out of trouble and to make them to help them make more money. That's basically what it boils down to. In my opinion, it doesn't really help the real economy. If they wanted to, maybe they could provide a stimulus directly into the real economy by printing fresh money and handing it over to the real economic actors directly, like maybe a loan free of charge, free of interest to you and I, for instance, to the real economic actors.
Mhm.
It's also
Now,
referred to as, like, let's say, a helicopter drop of money on the people. Why not try this if you want to do something like this anyway? I'm not a fan of that either, but it's the way they're doing this right now with with purchasing asset-backed securities. It's not really helping the real economy.
right. And I imagine along the line somewhere, as this next round of stimulus or whatever it's going to be called is rolled out, they're going to find out the same results that it don't work. And then at that point, what's
Yep.
going to be the third round? Oh, let's give it to the people. And so that's going to
Yep.
hopefully buy them some time. But more than likely, between now and then, I'm assuming something else will occur from around this planet that will probably put more pressures and thwart more of their plans. So I want to dive into the NERP aspect. And so there's several areas in your region that have negative interest rates now. And so that, I'm assuming, is a problem because I hear about banks willing to lend at a loss themselves. And so I'm assuming that kind of seems different, where you can take out a mortgage and pay back less, according to what they're advertising. So what does that look like in your area? And also, is the Netherlands itself directly, what's the environment right in your country?
In the Netherlands, we have ZERP, pretty much zero interest rate, and in that sense. So it's like savings account would yield maybe 0.01% or something like that. But in countries like Denmark, I believe in Denmark there are two banks that briefly provided mortgages at negative interest rates, so you could potentially buy a home and then make money on it. That would be interesting, right? But this is how insane it's getting, because let's say the system has to keep on going. That's what they envisage. So they're even willing to provide credit at negative interest rates. This is still an exception. It's not really happening a lot because obviously it's unsustainable anyhow. But since the banks are having to pay, they have to pay a negative interest, or they have to pay interest on their deposits. Being a negative interest rate on deposits, it's costing them money, so they have to lend out more to be able to keep the party going. And even at negative interest rates, apparently that's probably working if they can get rid of their let's say liquidity in that sense. That is just holding them back. This is probably also one of the reasons why the European Central Bank has announced like a two-tier interest rate system. And what they're looking to do is that they would like to alleviate the negative interest rate burden on the liquidity of the banks, let's say the excess deposits, and say, okay, you don't have to pay an interest on that. So we're not going to make that rate negative, but we're just going to keep the other rate negative. So it's like a two-tier system that they're looking to do right now. It's really interesting. It's unprecedented. Everything that's going on is unprecedented. It's totally crazy, in my opinion. So we'll see what this leads to, but in my opinion, it can only lead to an even harder crash of the economy in the near future.
Right, I do agree. And it's unfortunate they have a two-tier system where it looks like they're letting the banks that have the reserves off the hook, and then eventually they're going to trickle out to the main economy. Now, as a saver, as an investor in that type of environment, saving accounts don't yield anything, and so I hear about the threat of it actually being passed on to retail depositors there. I would assume people wouldn't allow that to happen for a longer period of time, or not. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think something very scary is on the horizon here, and let me explain that. Yes, there's talk of negative interest rates on savings for people, so this would directly, let's say, jeopardize savers in Europe, even also in the Netherlands, actually. So what people then can do is, of course, do something with that money, with maybe buy gold, silver, put it into other assets, or just hold cash. But I don't know if you've heard, but Christine Lagarde will be the successor of Mario Draghi as let's say the head of the ECB, and she already hinted at getting rid of cash, so moving to a cashless society. Now, this would mean that people cannot escape the negative interest rates by holding cash, because that will be impossible. It's probably going to be a matter of years, but still, this is an announcement that she sort of made. This leaves people with a few other options, especially when you look at all the let's say the inflated markets. If you want to put your money there and these markets start to crash, then you will lose your money as well. So where are you going to go with your money? So these are some very, very dangerous developments going on. Where are you going to go with your money? buy gold and silver. I think that's the only way out at this point. Buy physical gold and silver. Don't go into ETFs and the exchange traded funds because that's the COMEX is another interesting story. But yeah, probably physical metals.
Now, what's the likelihood? And I'd assume the ultimate long-term agenda for the banking sector as a whole is to force everyone into a solely digital type of environment. And so I think it's not coincidental that a couple other central bank governors, i.e. Mark Carney, referenced the idea of digital currencies and things of that nature. So is there any talk of that in the ECB reign? I know Christine Lagarde has become a little bit more favorable, I hear, to cryptocurrency. So is this by chance some type of linkage? And is this a planned transition from paper into something solely digital, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it is. And yeah, I think, Christine Lagarde is not a true economist. She's more of a lawyer, right? But she has a way of being able to influence people and to roll out political agendas. So maybe that's why she's being put in place there at the ECB to change the agenda completely and to go to a different type of system. This could also, be in line with what Mark Carney said at Jackson Hole a little while ago. I think it was August this year, and hinted at the end of the petrodollar, which is of course a big thing to say, and the beginning of maybe like a global digital currency system, something like that. So yeah, this is where it could all come together, and where we could move into a digital monetary system that's completely monitored and controlled by the powers that be.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious to find out the current status of the different nations that comprises of the ECB, or the EU rather. And so I hear a lot about recessionary talks, and I saw apparently Germany, who's been the leading nation amongst all those, it seems, they're having a little bit of a slowdown. And then we have Italy, who's having, governmental issues and paying back debt and all those type of things there. So what's the current status of the EU as a whole? Is it slowing down entirely, or is there different parts and pieces that are carrying different loads or whatnot? What's the status of the EU, et cetera?
Well, generally speaking, the EU is slowing down, definitely, in terms of GDP and GDP growth mostly, and inflation is falling behind. So when you look at the target rate of the ECB is nowhere near, so they're looking to increase this program, this QE program. But it's because, the economies are slowing down. Germany is not doing very well right now, and many other nations are really trailing. So, yeah, that's the reason why they're looking for to have these policies in place to sort of stimulate the economy and get it back on track. But again, it's not going to work.
Yeah. Now, I want to just backtrack a minute, because you mentioned about it appears to be things are heading towards cashless in nature. And so what's the current environment like there as far as people utilizing cash? I imagine just like here, debit cards has become very prevalent. So is cash still something that people tend to want to use over in that region? And do they recognize what's occurring? Like the fact that they want them to, I guess, no longer use cash and solely use digits. Is it people are starting to wake up over there?
Well, it differs from country to country. That's very interesting to see. I was in Vienna in September, and I've been to Germany a couple of times this year already. And of course, Germany is right next door from the Netherlands, where I live. But there's a big difference between countries like Austria and Germany, and for instance, the Netherlands. Where I live in the Netherlands, there's a lot of digital money being used. Credit cards, debit cards that are being used for payments. And I guess more than 50% of all payments are currently digital. But in Germany and in Austria, for instance, people are very reluctant to switch to that card system, to the digital system, and they're using way more cash. A lot of stores in Germany, for instance, in certain places that I've visited, they don't even accept a digital form of payment. They just want cash. So there are still lots of differences within the Eurozone, within different countries, which is interesting, I guess. A lot of people, especially in Austria, I talked to a couple of people who said, yeah, we don't really trust that system. We just want to stick to cash. It's the only real form of money, because some people there understand that whatever you're holding in the bank is not money, truly. Even legally, it's not money. It's an accounts receivable you have with that bank, right? So they're saving, let's say, they're saving your money in their vaults, figuratively speaking, because actually that's not true either. And you can have it if you can get it, if you can get to it, if you can use your bank account and you can transfer funds from your bank account to another bank account in the form of payment, then yeah, it's there. But in a time of crisis, they could just close and they could refrain you from getting to your accounts receivable, basically. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I see that as a major risk. I see that as a major drawback of this this digital system that they're announcing.
Yeah. Now, it was a couple years ago, I think it was 2013, if I'm not mistaken, there was a bank bail-in process in that region. And I want to say it was on Malta, if I'm not mistaken, where Cyprus. Okay, Cyprus. Good. Thanks for correcting.
2013 sometime, yeah.
And so over here, we haven't heard much about that as to whether or not it's been resolved or whatnot. But bail-in is clearly something that's written in all the documentations for central banks as a policy procedure, probably. What are some threats or concerns about bail-ins as they remove cash and they go negative and possibly freeze you out from your own accounts? Is that something that you anticipate seeing in the next downturn?
That could definitely be the case. Yeah, it's conjecture, basically. Back in 2013, when I started the Janssen report, I hinted at a major crash in the markets towards the turn of the decade. So around this time, we haven't seen it yet. Well, of course, the decade hasn't turned yet, but it's difficult to predict, and it's difficult to see where everything is headed. And we have to keep in mind that the banking community is also looking for a reset. They seem to be wanting to have some sort of reset of the whole system. And there are different opinions as to what that will look like. Maybe a switch to the special drawing rights system of the IMF as a new global currency, a new global system to rely on. Maybe a debt jubilee. Some people are saying. I don't really buy that. I don't think it's going to pan out that way. But yeah, there are certainly different developments, different scenarios, and I'm reluctant to really do a prediction. It's you never know. They can keep this party going for maybe a couple of years as long as people buy into it, as long as people don't rebel, which we actually did see in France. With the yellow vests, the gilets jaunes. They have been protesting out on the streets for a long time, and I think they're still there every weekend. Yeah. So yeah, people are showing themselves or are really standing up, but it's not in the media. So the media are really reluctant to show this on TV or in the newspapers, just very small snippets, but they're trying to downplay this. And as long as the big masses are not awake and are not truly standing up, then I think they can keep this party going for a long time to come, and they can use bail-ins under the guise of certain policy measures that have to happen. Otherwise, everybody will lose their money. All this nonsense can be used to keep the people silent and keep the people in place.
Right. Now, as we draw towards the end of our conversation, I'm curious to get your thoughts on what's currently happening on this side of the planet with the United States of America. And so we have the banking situation here with the overnight lending. And so Federal Reserve decided to come in and provide liquidity, which to me shows signs of stimulus / QE. But yet, just I think it was yesterday, 2 days ago, Jerome Powell referenced, he made a point of emphasis that it's not QE, it's not of the same nature, but it has the same similar characteristics. So, is the United States of America entering back into that same phase, you think, that the current EU situation where stimulus is around the corner or not?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think they have no choice either. I mean, it's like some sort of stealth QE, in my opinion. They, like you mentioned, they don't call it QE, but it probably is something like that. And there have been indications that they've been using Belgium, for instance, to funnel some QE through there, because Belgium, I think it was 2015 or something around that time, they did a large purchase of bonds, U.S. bonds, and this was somehow not QE, but it seems like this was a trick. Through the Federal Reserve to have some sort of QE, stealth QE, I think that it was called. And I read a few articles on that, but I'm not sure on the details, so I didn't really dive into that. because of course I don't have all the time in the world. But I think what we're seeing right now, and the announcements I saw from Powell, for instance, and the Fed, they're hinting towards stimulus. So some form of QE, yes.
Yeah. So very last question. And so it looks like as a whole, there are several nations around this planet that are already, quote unquote, in recession already. So it looks like the great financial crisis that happened a decade ago was more of an isolated event that trickled into some of the developing countries. But because of monetary policy, it looks like everything might be spreading out to smaller emerging markets as well as the developed nations. So do you foresee a global recession? And if it is a global recession, how bad could it be, in your opinion?
I do foresee a global recession. I think it's mathematical. It's a mathematical certainty, with 250 trillion of debt floating around everywhere. All the tricks that have been pulled by the banksters to make us believe that everything's okay. Let's say the phony growth numbers. In my opinion, many of these numbers are kind of concocted out of thin air. They're like the GDP growth here and there that you've been seeing. It's there's something that's not right about these numbers. When I look at the Netherlands, which is a developed country, we still seem to have a strong economy, as they say. I do see the middle class slowly disappearing, or at least getting into trouble, where even parents that are both working are having a tough time to provide for their families. So basically what we're seeing is that this monetary system, and it's a global system, this monetary system is really funneling wealth from the 90% to the top levels by usury, and I guess usury, interest on this type of money is hardly mentioned in the media or by economic experts, you could call them. They don't really talk about this interest rate system where money is created by private companies like banks, and an interest is added to that to make money on that. And this, let's say, interest upon interest upon interest, which is called compound interest, is really leading to a large stream of money flowing into the pockets of the bankers, basically, through all kinds of structures and systems. And yeah, no wonder that Oxfam Novib, for instance, comes out with a report every year that the wealth has once again moved from let's say the 90% of the world to a very small elite. This is not a coincidence. This is just because of how the monetary system works. And I believe this is also one of the reasons why we are going to head for a global recession, because the middle classes are disappearing around the world. I think in the United States, there's a big problem as well, with a lot of people working 2 or 3 jobs. Unemployment's supposed to be low, I guess, south of 4%, I think, which in my opinion is not the case. If you look at the metrics, the way the Bureau of Labor Statistics is now calculating unemployment rates, it's different from what it used to be. It's kind of more, let's say, it's like a window dressing type of thing. It's if you use the metrics of 1990 and before that, I guess it would be 23 or 20% right now. So we see these things happening all over the world. Even Japan has been struggling with QE for 20, 25 years maybe, off the top of my head. And you see the most, let's say, the weirdest things happening there, with the Bank of Japan sitting on 20% of the Nikkei index. They own 20% of the Nikkei index, because all this QE, all this money they've created, they've used to purchase shares just to prop things up and to keep the party going. So QE hasn't worked there either, but still it continues to go on. So eventually this has to come down there, because the measures are getting crazier and crazier and crazier. And for as long as they get away with it, we'll probably keep the party going. But at a certain point, if it comes down, I think it comes crashing down hard, because everything is intertwined. All the markets are connected in the world. We're sitting on still on a dollar system, of course, the petrodollar, if you will, as the world reserve currency. But this is also showing a lot of cracks. So a lot of people have been warning about this, like Mike Maloney and Peter Schiff and all kinds of people have been talking about this. And it's I think we're getting close to that point. Again, it's hard to predict. I still think it's within the next few years, but you never know.
All right.
But if it comes down hard, and I think a lot of people are going to suffer.
All right. Well, I do agree. Well, Marco Janssen, it's been great having you here on Silver Doctors. For those that can you point people back in your direction so they can stay in tune with what you have going on and where they can, stay in touch with your work?
Yeah, sure. It's all free stuff. I just do this because I think it's fair to share this message of my research that I continue to do. It's the JanssenReport.net, the Janssen with double S report.net. That's my website. I have a YouTube channel, the Janssen Report with double S again. So if people want to look me up there, they can. It's I do a report every other month or so. So it's not that frequent anymore because I just don't have enough time to do that. But I try to keep up, and I will put one out pretty soon as well.
Sounds good. Well, once again, it's been great having you on Silver Doctors. Looking forward to continue to stay in tune with you, as well as hopefully have you back on a couple months from now, and hopefully have a much better report or much better story at that time if things are still being held together. But other than that, once again, Marco, it's been great having you on Silver Doctors.
Great to be there. Thank you, Mike.